Hi, everyone. I'm Paul with MadCap Software. We are on video number 2 of our series on source control. And this one is all about binding Flare projects to source control and also importing projects from source control. This is one area that traditionally has kind of been a pain point for people. And it's actually one reason why MadCap Central was invented. Central, of course, does way more than be a source control solution. It does a whole lot more, but that is one of the really great things about it. So I am going to take you into these two sections. First, we're going to look at binding. We're going to go through the binding process, and then we will switch gears. And once a project is bound, we'll look at importing project files that are already bound somewhere. Hey, so I originally recorded this video some time ago, and the Flare UI has changed a bit since then. And I wanted to add this little section in before all of the others. And this section, I want to talk about a little bit about binding outside of Flare. People who want to bind outside of Flare, and maybe they want to actually use something else out of Flare instead of the Flare interface to do things. If that is you, then just keep watching. And if it's not, if you're thinking, no, I don't even know what you're talking about, and I just want to use Flare and get the thing bound, skip this section. Down in the play bar, hover over and you'll see where the next section starts. Just click and go from there. But if you're one of these people who you want to bind outside of Flare, you're comfortable using something else, and you just don't want to use the Flare interface, I'm not going to go through the steps to bind outside of Flare because that's a non-Flare thing. But you can do that. You could bind, say, in Get Bash, something like that. But I do want to make you aware of a couple of things. So if you're going to do that, I want to let you know that there is this option here. You go to File, Options, and then on the source control tab, there's this bind detection section in here. And all this means is that for these different providers, either this is enabled or it's not, and this will just scan and see if you already have a binding to source control. Now, when you bind inside Flare, this just turns on automatically. For these three providers, it's off by default, and for Git, it is on by default. So you might not want Flare, scanning and doing this bind detection. Now, it's not going to hurt anything. So for example, in Flare, we have this pending changes window pane, and it populates as you make changes. And so it would scan and see, oh, okay, you got this binding, and it will populate as you're going. But Flare's not doing anything without your permission. So it's really up to you, but some people prefer to turn this off. Let me tell you what else this relates to. If you want to use another tool other than Flare to do all your source control tasks outside, and you just think, I don't even want to see the source control ribbon, I don't want to see the source control explorer, none of that UI, that's fine. You can do that. The way that you can handle this is go to Project Properties, and then you're going to see, all right, I've got, this is my binding here. And I actually have what's called a dual binding, which we'll get to in a later movie. But I have my first binding to Git. Actually, I'm using GitHub and then MadCap Central. So I have two bindings here. And you can disable a provider. You can click this and remove the check mark from the checkbox. And then the source control UI will be hidden. All right, so you can do that. If you are dual bound, by the way, you would still use this button right here to push your changes up to central, and this is covered more in the dual binding, section movie. But just wanted to let you know that even if you do remove that UI, this thing is still there. And if you happen to make changes in Flare and you didn't use your other tool to sync things, this will do an auto commit. So that's just an FYI. But this option in the project properties to disable the provider. That's per project. If you've got a bunch of projects, maybe you've got one folder and you've got a repository, a Git repository, and all your projects are in there and they're all using that same repository. That's cool. You can do that. And you want to disable the provider for all the projects. Instead of going into each one, you can go into File Options, disable Git. This is only for Git, by the way, that this will work. This what I'm talking about here, where you disable this and it will disable the provider throughout. Okay, so that's really just information for people who want to bind outside of Flare and use stuff outside of Flare, don't want to see the interface, but I wanted to make you aware of it. Also, one more thing before I forget, you want to git ignore file, and Flare takes care of this for you. If you bind within Flare, it just adds this git ignore file. If you bind outside of Flare and you don't have one, come in here to the source control Explorer if you don't disable it and turn it off, and there actually is an option down here that mine says edit ignore file, because I already have one, but it'll say create ignore file. You can create it, and the ignore file just lets you specify, hey, these are the files in my project I don't want to be syncing with source control. So things like your analyzer folder and your outputs folder, you don't want those. Okay, so that section, this section is just for you if you're binding outside of Flare. All right, so you want to bind your project to source control. The first thing, obviously, that you need to do is make sure you have this remote repository or remote depot, or depending on your provider, whatever solution you're using, you need to set this up elsewhere. And that is outside the scope of this video series, as I mentioned before, but I'm not going to try to do all of these, but I am going to show you one that's really simple, and that is using GitHub. If you want to bind to Git, just to take you through the exercise and show you that. One of the reasons why MadCap Central was created was to take the pain out of this step and out of the binding process and the import process. It just makes it really easy, and you don't even have to set up anything remotely. It's already there. You just log in with your username and password. But let's go in. First of all, let's go to GitHub, and I'm going to just set up a quick repository for Git and show you, how that's done. So I am logged into my account on github.com, and you can see I already have some repositories in here I was just messing around with over time. And now the GitHub could change from the time that I'm recording this. So what you're looking at in the UI right now, months from now, it may not look like this, but for now, this is the way it is. And I'm just going to click new, and I am going to add a repository name in here. I'm just going to call it my repository. All right, and that's available. I'm going to come down here. I'm going to select private because I don't want the whole internet, people everywhere, to see this. It's just private. Now, when you create a repository, a Git repository, you want to start out, you want it to be empty. You don't want to add these other files. It gives you the opportunity here to add a README file and add git ignore. Flare is actually going to add a git ignore for you. So you don't need to do that. But you want to bind first, and then later, if you want to come back and add a README file, you can do that. I'm just going to click Create Repository, and there it is. And this is the URL that I need. You have a choice between HTTPS or SSH, and if I click SSH, you can see, all right, it changed, the URL changed. You probably want to maybe have a conversation with people in your company. What do you prefer, HTTPS or SSH? I'm just going to use HTTPS. And so I'm just going to copy this URL because that's what I'm going to need to do my binding. All right, let's go into Flare now. Got that remote location set up. Now, when you bind to source control, the first thing is, if you're going to bind to Git or Central, as opposed to these other providers, there are a couple of options that you should look at here in File Options. You come in here and you go to the Source Control tab here, and you got this option right here. It says use Git executable for network functions. This lets you use what's called Git for Windows, this Git exe. And that's probably a good idea for you to have. Now, if you don't have it installed, if you're just coming in here the first time, you'll have a link in here, and you'll click on that and it'll take you to a website where you can download this, and you just go through the wizard, accept all the default settings, and it will install it, and then this will be populated automatically for you. I already have it set up. It's very easy to do that. Then if you do want to bind to MadCap Central, you have it. Hey, I'm going to break in here into this video like I sometimes do, because the UI, the functionality's changed, which sometimes happens. And what I did in the original video, I talked about this section in here on HTTPS and SSH when you're binding to MadCap Central. The thing is, this option is now kind of obsolete because the ability to connect through SSH has gone away. So some people in the past would choose this because it just worked better with really, really large projects. But over time, HTTPS, what's happened behind the scenes has actually gotten better. And there are some security issues with doing this through SSH to Central. Now, if you're binding to your own server, you're not binding to MadCap Central, you can still use SSH. It's just that this option, you are always going to be using HTTPS. If you selected SSH, it's not going to change it. So just want to make you aware of that. When you are binding to MadCap Central, you are always doing so over HTTPS. Cancel out of here because I already have that set up. Now, want to bind. Okay, so we have the four main providers that you can integrate with, and then there is Central. I'm going to treat Central separately here in a little bit, but the other four, you come in here and you can actually bind when you're creating a new project. You select that, get into the new project wizard, and it's not going to let me do this because I'm at a lower resolution. Okay. Anyway, trust me on this, there's a checkbox down here in the lower left that says bind to source control, and you would select that. Then you click the next button to go to the next page of the wizard, and that's where you would put in your bindings. It's going to be the same stuff that I'm going to show you here in a bit. This is the way to do it with a new project. All right. I'm going to just get out of there though. So I already have a project called GitHub bound project. I'm going to open that right there. It's just a tiny little project. And if I go into Windows Explorer, you're going to see it here in my C drive. I like to put projects in the root C drive, the ones that I use. Test ones I'll put in the My Projects folder that's deeper in into my directories. But I have it right here at C. And the reason I do that is because it just is a simpler path, can help for different things. So I've got it right there. There's my project files. Now, so it already exists. What I want to do, if I want to bind that, I go to the project ribbon, come all the way over here on the right to project properties, select this, and now on the source control tab, I select bind project. All right, so the first thing you do is you select the provider you want to use. Right now it's on Git because that was the last thing I was messing around with. And I'm going to take you through each one of these just to show you the fields. But I'm not actually going to go through and bind projects to each one of these providers. I don't own enough Tylenol to do that. I'm just going to go through and do the simple one to Git. All right, so first thing is I want to select remote repository. This is what I'm going to be connecting to. I'm also going to select push on bind because eventually I'm going to do this anyway. I want to transfer all of my project files, clone these up to this remote repository. Now, this is the last one that I had been using, so it's already populated in here, but I'm going to paste over this. There's the new one that I just created. You saw me create a little bit ago called My Repository. And I was messing around also with this other thing. I'm going to put in my name in here and put in my email address. All right. Now, save per, you can choose user or you can choose project. And this was really about, do you want to maintain the same identity across projects that are bound? And most people are probably going to just select user, but you could select project if you have different identities for them. Comment, you can put in whatever you want in there. If you don't put anything in, it's going to have initial check-in, which I'll just leave in this case. Now, I'm not going to click OK yet because I want to show you fields for these other providers. Let's go to Perforce Helix Core. You choose that. Now you got to put in your server. And by the way, as I mentioned before, a lot of times you just kind of inherit whatever provider that your company's already set up with. So somebody may have already have all this set up, and you just need to get in contact with whoever's in charge, get the correct server location to put in here, and then Perforce will control the users up on Perforce. So you click this and select your user type. Perforce works with depots, D-E-P-O-T, depots, or streams. A depot can have multiple streams. Streams that's Perforce's version of branching. Now, Flare only supports branching for Git and Central, because Central uses Git. You're not going to be able to do branching within Flare. So you're not going to be able to do streams in there, but you can bind to an individual stream as opposed to a depot. So you just select whatever you want in here. Again, a comment, you can select that to keep the files checked out. Go to Subversion, and this is a little bit different, but pretty similar. Put in the server, project path. All right, you're going to have a folder, a directory, wherever that server is. That's where you're going to put your files, your project files. Okay, comment down there, and then Microsoft Team Foundation Server, also known as Azure DevOps. Select that, and again, put in server, project path, fill these things out. So that's it. But one of the reasons why people have, this can be painful for people is you got to put in just the right thing, get all this stuff set up, and then you click OK, and it binds. Hopefully, if everything's done right. Now I'm going to go back to Git. I have all this set up, and I'm just going to click OK. All right, it's not that big of a project, so it's just going to be creating this connection, and it's pushing these files from my Flare project up to GitHub, and it finishes. And it's bound because these things change here. This button changes to unbind. Cool. Click OK. And I'm done with that. Now, there are other details, other things that might come up when you're binding. For example, if you have to put in username, password, or public or private keys, some kind of information. So I'm not covering everything here in this video, but if you go to the help, there are binding project topics for all these providers. There's the one for Git, and you can come down and see all this information. And yeah, so if you need to put in public keys, private keys, all this information, you may need to refer to this possibly. And as I said, there are similar topics for Perforce, Subverse, Team Foundation servers. So, and if you have problems binding and you can't figure it out from this, just get a hold of technical support. They'll help you out. Now I'm going to go also to Windows Explorer. This is what we were just looking at. Notice that Flare added this git ignore folder file, which is what we want, because we don't want all of the folders and files to be involved in the source control processes. We don't want the output, the analyzer. We don't want project users to be in there. So the git ignore is going to take care of that. Git, this is your repository, your local repository. Git works differently. So you have this locally, plus you have the remote one. And if you go in here and just wanted to show you this, right click on that config file, edit with Notepad++, there is your repository. That's where it is recorded. Okay. Now come back out here to the root C, and I also have I have another project here called Central Bound Project, which I haven't bound yet. All right. And so let's go through that process to see what that's like. Let's go back into Flare, and I'm going to switch to that project. I've got my link right there. It's actually the same files, the same template project that I used. Now, want to bind to Central. This is how easy it is. You go to your view ribbon, go to MadCap Central, and you got to log in. So mine is, there's my email address, and then I got to put in my password. Log in. Hey, I have another update for you. Because when I originally recorded this video, the login for Central was a bit different. So when you go to the Central window pane, now if you're in a version of Flare that is older than Flare 2022 R2, you are going to see what I originally showed in this video, the login fields. However, if you're using Flare 2022 R2 or later, you're going to see something like this, where you just have this login button, and you also have this login button in the upper right, which does the same thing. These changes were made because MadCap Central now supports single sign-on. So you could set up your license so that it uses the same credentials, your company credentials that run through your identity provider. So maybe you log in the morning with your your password, your company password, and you could be using the same thing to log in to Central, the same credentials. It just depends on if you want to use SSO or set it up. Otherwise, yeah, you would be using your Central password, unique Central password to log in. So the other thing is, because the fields aren't here, when you click login, you're going to see something more like this. It's going to be a browser-based window. And if you want to know more about logging in through SSO, you can see a video, the MadCap Central video for that. But otherwise, yeah, you just go through the motions of logging in that way. And that's how you know you're logged in. It puts your name and information there. Okay, but it's not bound to anything yet. You have to click this button right here, this plug, which says upload this project to MadCap Central. That's just another way of saying binding and, clone my project up there. So I'm going to click that. All right, it brings up this dialog. Now, most people are just going to be on one Central license. I have multiple Central licenses. I'm going to use this FictionSoft one. There's my name of my project. I'm going to keep that. I could put a project description in there if it helps. I'm just going to leave it blank. Click OK. So now it's just going through the process of binding this thing and uploading those projects or those project files up to MadCap Central. It's not that big of a project, so it didn't take that long. It says it's successful, click OK. As soon as I do that, the Central window pane over here changes, populates with all this information. That is a clue that the thing is bound. Another way that you can tell that your project is bound is you're all of a sudden going to get this source control ribbon up here. MadCap Central is based on Git, so you see Git terminology in here. If I had bound to one of the other providers, you would still see a source control ribbon, but the buttons would be different because they use, different concepts, different terms. So I am bound. Now I'm going to go back to Windows Explorer. There's my project. Again, it added the Git repository here, the git ignore. So that is the binding process. Next, we want to go in and look at importing projects from source control. All right, so we did the binding. Now we need to look at importing. And maybe you're going, well, why do I need to import project from source control. You may not, but if you're working, here's a couple of reasons why you may, or people that you work with may. If you're working on a team, so only one person needs to bind the project to source control. The other writers on the team would import that. And that way you get the same bindings, the same settings and everything. So it's the same, really, it's the same files that you're working with, those writers. All right, so that is one reason. Another reason is something that I talked about in the first video, and that is, what if you lose your laptop or it gets destroyed or something? You can always get your project back by importing from source control. So let's go into Flare and check out this, how it works. All right, so I am in a Flare project in here, but I'm actually working in VMware because I want to pretend that I'm a different writer. So I'm not messing around with, my desktop where I had everything else. Okay, so let's first talk about this GitHub project that we have bound. Another writer wants to get that. So they simply go to the file ribbon, hover over new project, and select import from source control. Now, it brings up the wizard, and you go through and you can select any of the providers. Ours is Git, and it just remembered this was the last thing that I was working on. So that's a different repository. I'm going to go to this is my repository that I had before. Again, that is the URL. If you kind of get out of that and you are wondering, oh, what's the URL for it? Open it back up. It's just right up here. Okay, so I'm just going to copy that and go back into VMware, and I'm going to put that remote path right there. I'm going to pretend to be Lloyd Dobler. There's my email. I work with a bunch of younger people, so they're always going, who's Lloyd Dobler? And then I go, I'm really old. All right, so got that set up. I'm going to use this save per user. Click next, click browse. And here, what it's doing is it's bringing up this additional dialogue. So it's making me sign in, and you can do it with your browser, or you can do it with a code, and browser is actually much faster. So I'm just going to click that. Okay, and the browser, it just says, all right, that succeeded. Close this, return to the application. I go in here, I'm going to click browse again in here. So you can see these providers work differently. And I'm going to navigate in here. There is the project that I want to import. Click OK. And now I click next. And now it puts in the name here, Git bound project. And I am going to put it again at my root C drive. You can put it wherever you want, but that's where I'm going to put it here on my on VMware. I'm going to click finish. Okay, so I get that, click OK. It loads, there it is. So second user has the project here, and they're bound to the same repository, and the two writers can just be working, sending files, pushing files up, pulling files down. Okay, now let's go through the other scenario where I had the other project that was bound to MadCap Central. Let's see what that's like. Okay, I am going to, first of all, in here, I'm going to go to View, MadCap Central. And I need to log in. Okay, so I'm going to log in as this different person. So, Dobler. All right, so Lloyd Dobler is logged in, but this project, right now I have that Git bound project. Actually, let me just go ahead and close that out. So we don't have anything. There's no project open, doesn't matter. I don't have anything. I'm not, if I opened up a project, as it wasn't bound, I would have that same button right here where I could bind something, but I want to do something differently. I want to import. Now, before Lloyd imports, we need to make sure on Central that he has the right permissions. He can do this because just because he has this option here in Flare doesn't mean he's given the rights to do that. I'm going to go into MadCap Central. And you can see that this is my project, and I'm going to refresh my projects page in here. So you can see this is the project that I bound to Central just a little while ago. All right. And if I go into users, and I'm logged in as myself in here, but there's Lloyd. I'm going to come in and look at Lloyd and go, all right, what permissions does Lloyd have? Lloyd has all the permissions. These are set globally, or you can do it by project. Now, he's not associated with that other project yet. So he has to have the right permissions. And the main thing is this, to import, you have to have that import poll, but he has everything. So I'm just going to cancel out of here, but I still need to make Lloyd part of, he has to have access to that project. So I am going to go in to, and the UI for Central changes occasionally because we put out new releases. So the UI here might be a little bit different than what is out right now. I am going, or by the time this video is released, I'm going to select Central Bound Project so that Lloyd is associated with that. That's all you really need to do, is just make sure that you're associated with the project, you got the right permissions. Okay. All right, so he's associated with it. It appears right there. Just close out of this. And by the way, if you're wondering, well, I can't remember how to get to Central. Well, you can always get there from Flare. From that MadCap Central window pane, you just click this little button. That opens up Central for you. Okay, so he has the right, he's associated with that project that's been bound to Central. He has the permissions. Now he just has to import it. So you click that button. Brings up this dialog. Again, choose your license. You might just be on one. And I am going to go in here and select Central Bound Project. That's the one I want to import. Where do I want it? Well, I'm going to do the same thing as before. I am going to put it here on my C drive. Again, put it wherever you want. Select folder, click OK. A longer project is going to take longer to go through that dialog. That one went pretty fast. It's done. Just click Finish. Would you like to pull the latest repository and update the files in this project? That's a good idea to do. So let's say yes. And where are you going to pull it from? Well, I'm pulling it from Central. There's no other choice in here. Click OK. So now it's going through the action of actually pulling those files. Again, not much to pull down because it's a small project. Everything's up to date. Cool. Click OK. Go to Content Explorer. There's the projects. It's bound. Got my source control ribbon as well. So that's it. That's importing both from the GitHub example and MadCap Central. And it's going to be somewhat similar, some differences if you use one of the other providers. So there you have it with binding and importing. First, get that remote location set up, work with others in your company if necessary, go through and import through the project properties or the wizard, however you want to do it, and then get other people on your team to import that same project so they've got the same settings as you. Be patient. Hopefully you don't hit any snags. And if you do, just don't hesitate to contact tech support. They're awesome. That's what they're there for. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.